Tonight, as the world around you softens into quiet and the day folds in on itself, let us walk once more through a story long buried. Not a tale of generals or victories, not of flags or conquests, but of a boy named Elias, who carried no weapon, only bandages and trembling hands. Elias was not trained to fight. He was trained to stop the bleeding, to find a pulse, to hold a dying hand until it stopped shaking. He was a medic, a patch of calm in the chaos. But war, as it often does, did not spare him its weight. This is not the story of how he died. This is the story of how he tried to keep others alive, and what it cost him. Let us now open his journal. The words are faint, the ink soaked into brittle paper. But tonight they breathe again. In the field, mornings did not arrive gently. There were no roosters, no chirping birds, only the low, metallic clatter of stretchers, and the occasional distant echo of artillery, dull and guttural like the stomach of the earth growling in its sleep. Elias would open his eyes in a half-made cot, stiff from the night air. He didn't wake all at once. No soldier truly did. Instead, he would lie there for a moment, listening, not for sounds of safety, but for absence. Absence of shelling, absence of shouting. Those were the only signs he had been spared another emergency. Sometimes the quiet would last. Other times it ended before he could lace his boots. I learned to wake with one ear still in sleep and the other in fear, Elias wrote in his journal. Even in dreams I am waiting for someone to need me. The aid station wasn't much. Just canvas walls stitched together with hope and dried blood. The floor was dirt, compacted by footsteps and shadowed by exhaustion. The tables, folding and metal, were often slick with whatever had spilled hours before. Gauze was laid out on a repurposed crate. There were jars of cloudy alcohol, a tub for soaking instruments, a drawer that never closed properly and always squeaked when opened. The sound Elias began to associate with life-saving or life-losing decisions. There was a cot in the corner. He rarely used it. On one of the poles hung a rosary someone had left behind. He didn't know whose it was, but he never moved it. "We make shrines from what doesn't break," he wrote. Even if we don't believe in them, there was no schedule, no shifts. Elias was on duty always, not because someone told him to be, but because no one else could be. Men would arrive in waves, carried in, dragged in, sometimes walking under their own power with blood pooling in their boots. Elias would greet each one with a soft word and a fast scan, always the eyes first. If they moved, there was time. If not, there might still be a moment. His hands never stopped moving. Compress here, tourniquet there, inject, suture, wrap, breathe, forget, repeat. "I learned to work faster than panic," he wrote, "but I never learned to work without shaking." No matter how long he scrubbed, the smell of iron stayed on his skin. The creases in his palms began to stain pink. Over time, the men stopped noticing. So did he. He used to bandage others with clean, deliberate lines. But the war made surgeons of butchers. Wrapping wounds became instinct, a dance of cloth and trembling fingers. My hands were meant for something else, Elias once said to another medic. I think they still remember how to hold a pencil better than a bone. To stay sane, Elias began to whisper the names of herbs under his breath. Chamomile, rosemary, thyme, as he wrapped bandages. Not because he had them, but because it reminded him of peace, of kitchens, of gardens. He never explained this to anyone. He also kept a small photo of his sister in his breast pocket. Her face was blurred by rainwater now, but he didn't mind. He claimed he could still hear her laugh when the shelling paused. Sometimes, if no one came for a few hours, Elias would sit outside the aid station, legs stretched, face tilted toward the pale sky. He would close his eyes and count seconds, just to own something, a little ritual of borrowed peace. When I count, I can pretend I am not needed. When I stop, someone always calls my name. 1 morphine vial, 3 patients in pain, 1 suture needle that snapped during triage, a burn victim with no name, a child soldier with both legs gone. Every day was a list of ethical compromises. He began choosing who to save by voice, whose cries were strongest. It was a flawed system, and he knew it. If they scream, they live, he told himself. If they don't, I move on. At night, Elias often lay staring at the ceiling of the tent, where shadows danced like slow-moving ghosts. He would write when he could. The words weren't always complete. Sometimes just phrases. Tried to save him. Too much blood. Used the last of the powder. He asked for his dog before he died. He used the margins to write poems he never finished, and when the candle burned too low to see, he would whisper their endings to no one. In this place, the sound of breathing was sacred, more than any anthem or prayer. Elias came to measure time not in hours, but in heartbeats, and he spent every one of his trying to protect someone else's. But there was one patient he could not forget, one man he treated differently, a name etched deeper than the rest. As we turn the page in Elias's journal, we'll meet that soldier and witness the moment when being a medic stopped being enough. There are always names that fade, that pass through the hands of medics like footprints in sand, brief, unrepeatable, and then gone. But not Marco. Marco was different. Elias met Private Marco Bellini during the autumn push across the Apennines, a long and grinding campaign filled with mud, bitter cold, and hopelessly unclear objectives. Marco arrived one morning just after the rain had stopped. He wasn't carried in. He walked. Blood-soaked shirt, a shallow wound along his ribs, dirt on his face like war paint. But he smiled. "Sorry, Doc," he said through clenched teeth. "I didn't want to bother anyone. Figured I'd wait until it stopped bleeding." Elias had seen hundreds of men, but something in Marco's posture, a kind of resilience laced with foolishness, made him pause. "He made jokes while I cleaned his wound," Elias wrote. "Not the nervous kind, the kind that remind you the sun still exists." Marco stayed in the aid station for 3 days, a rare stretch of calm where the front held steady and the wounded trickled in slowly. They spoke often about life before the war. Marco had been a shoemaker's apprentice. He missed his tools, missed the smell of leather and polish more than food, he said. Elias shared stories of his sister, how she used to run barefoot through the garden, crushing basil leaves just to smell her feet after. "You've got soft hands for a medic," Marco said once. "That's how I know you're still human." In those 3 days, Elias found himself remembering who he was before he wore the medic's armband. They'd played cards with a deck missing the Queen of Hearts. Marco made up a new rule. If you draw the Queen's ghost, you get to ask a question no one has to answer. It was silly, but it became ritual. Marco once asked, "Do you think anyone we save will ever think of us again?" Elias didn't answer. He wasn't asking out of vanity, Elias later wrote. He asked the way someone might ask a ghost for permission to rest. On the fourth day, the calm broke. Artillery came down, not near the line but behind it. An error, perhaps, a cruel accident. Elias was reorganizing supplies. Marco had stepped outside to stretch his legs. He never made it 5 paces from the aid station. The explosion came without warning, and with it, silence. When the dust cleared, Elias ran, his boots sliding in mud, his throat tight. Marco was still breathing, but his leg was shattered. Shrapnel embedded in his side, eyes open, blinking. "Doc," he said. "Am I still smiling?" Elias carried him back. Refused to let the stretcher-bearers touch him. He worked for hours, longer than he had ever worked on anyone. Morphine, clamps, stitches, more morphine. And still Marco grimaced. "Don't leave me," Marco whispered, not out of fear, but exhaustion. Despite all he tried, Elias knew Marco would not survive the night. He had lost too much blood. And though Elias bandaged and whispered and stayed beside him, the breath grew shallower, the skin cooler, the space between words stretched like fog. That night, Elias didn't write. He just sat there, holding Marco's hand, humming something, not a song he remembered, but a rhythm that kept him grounded. Marco passed just before dawn. I've watched hundreds die, but this was the first time I forgot I was a medic. I wasn't treating a wound. I was trying to keep someone from disappearing. And I failed. Elias had saved many. He had lost more. But Marco became a name that echoed. Not because he was different, but because Elias let himself feel it. Just once he stopped being a medic and became a friend. As you breathe softly now, wrapped in your own stillness, imagine Elias in that cold tent. The candle flickering low, one cot empty, a single deck of cards missing its queen, and a journal open to a blank page he couldn't yet face. In the next segment, we turn from Elias as personal sorrow to something he could never explain, the dreams that began haunting him, and the whispering voice he thought he had buried. Not every scar lies on the skin. Some settle in the shadows between waking and sleep. Some come at night, not as screams, but as whispers. After Marco's death, something shifted in Elias. He continued his duties, cleaning wounds, calming the frightened, rationing what little healing he could offer. But there was now a quiet detachment behind his eyes. Not coldness, just distance. Like someone watching their own life through a window they couldn't open. "The hours are softer now," Elias wrote. "They pass like snow falling sideways. I still move, but I don't feel it." And then the dreams began. It was simple. Elias sat in the aid tent. The table in front of him was clean, spotless. Too clean. The tools gleamed as if untouched. Outside there was no wind, no birds, no gunfire. Just silence, thick and still, like snow before it falls. Marco entered, whole, smiling. He didn't speak. He just nodded, pulled up a chair, and started sorting gauze with Elias, as if he had never left, as if the war had paused to allow something gentler. "I didn't want to wake up," Elias scribbled. "But even there, I knew, you can't unbury the dead." Night after night, Elias dreamed versions of the same scene. Sometimes Marco spoke. Sometimes he didn't. Once, Marco asked, "Are you still counting heartbeats?" Another time, "Did you ever fix the cot leg?" The details changed, but the feeling remained, familiarity twisted by loss. In one dream, Elias found himself kneeling in the snow, digging through mud with his bare hands. He didn't know why, until he found a pair of worn boots, Marcos, sticking out of the earth like roots trying to grow upward. He woke with dirt under his nails, but he hadn't left his cot. One night, the Queen of Hearts appeared again, the card that had been missing. In the dream, it lay on the floor beside his cot, curling at the corners, faded but unmistakable. He bent to pick it up, and on the back, scrawled in a hand not quite his own, were the words, "Ask your question." He didn't. He just held the card and sat, the candle beside him burning low, casting shadows that didn't move like they should. Sometimes, he later wrote, I think Marco wasn't haunting me. I think he was helping me stay. As the days passed, Elias began to lose the boundary between memory and moment. He would glance up from a wound and think he saw Marco leaning against the tent pole. Once he even heard him laugh, the same uneven chuckle that used to follow bad card hands. He never told anyone, because in war, madness wears many uniforms. And sometimes a ghost is just another kind of medicine, the kind that doesn't heal, but helps you keep breathing. What do we carry with us when the body can no longer hold the weight? For Elias, it was never the wounds that broke him. It was the echoes, the quiet that followed a name spoken one last time, the smile remembered more clearly than a mother's face, the question left unasked. As you drift deeper into stillness, imagine the aid station once more, empty, dim, a medic sitting alone, his hands idle for once, and the ghost of a friend lingering just beyond the canvas. In the next segment, we turn the pages of Elias's journal once more, this time to letters he wrote but never sent, letters filled with truths he couldn't speak aloud, and didn't expect anyone to read. Some soldiers sent home photos. Others sent pressed flowers, medals, or torn fabric from the flag of a captured town. But Elias sent nothing, because what he wrote he never mailed. In the flap of his journal, beneath medical notes and casualty sketches, there was a hidden pouch, stitched carefully into the lining with leftover thread. Inside it were folded pages, a handful of unsent letters, all addressed, none delivered. Dear Ana, I used to think I'd come home with stories, the kind you could laugh at over tea, but now I think I'll only come back with silence. The basil in your garden, does it still grow wild along the fence? Sometimes when I press bandages, I remember how you used to grind the leaves in your palms and breathe them in. Funny how memory clings to scent. I want to be useful here. I want to help. But every day I feel like a bucket trying to hold the sea. If I don't make it back, just know I saw so many sunrises. And even when the world felt like mud and blood, I remembered the color green. That was you. Love always, Elias. He wrote this letter the day after he couldn't save a boy who looked no older than 15. He tore the envelope in half, but he kept the letter. To the life I was supposed to have, I'm sorry I didn't reach you. I had plans, you know, a small clinic, a porch with chipped paint, maybe a dog too tired to bark. Asterisk. You were waiting for me, I think, on the other side of this war. But the road is getting hard to see. If I could, I'd come find you. But I think I've started turning into smoke. You can feel me, but not hold me. This was not addressed to anyone, just folded once and tucked behind his dog tag, as if it might guide someone someday to what he'd hoped to be. You made it easier, Marco. You laughed when we all forgot how. And when you closed your eyes, I swore I saw peace. But it was mine, not yours. There's a guilt in saving others while you slipped away. I keep thinking I missed something, a hidden bleed, a breath too shallow. I replay it. I rewrite it. I try to find the page where I did better. Sometimes I dream you're still in the cot. You wake up and ask if the cards are shuffled yet. I wish I could tell you yes. This letter Elias rewrote 3 times. None of the versions were complete. The ink blurred on the last line. The last letter was never titled, never addressed. It was a loose scrap, its edges burned from a nearby blast. I wonder how many words die before they reach a mouth. I wonder how many truths I've kept quiet so the others wouldn't break. I've patched wounds, but the holes in me grow louder. There's no gauze for the soul, no morphine for memory. If someone ever finds these letters, read them slowly. I wrote them in pieces. What are unsent letters, if not a kind of quiet surrender? Not to hopelessness, but to truth. The truth we can't always speak aloud. For Elias, these letters were not meant for mailboxes or family tables. They were meant to anchor him, to remind him there was a world outside the tent, outside the blood, outside the names he whispered as they faded. They were written not for the living, but to keep himself alive. As you rest now, listening to the hush between each breath, imagine Elias sitting by candlelight, a pencil in his hand, pages soft with fingerprints. The night still, the silence not empty, but full of everything he could never say out loud. In the next segment, we'll explore how Elias coped with the long shadows, the rituals, the habits, the small, strange acts that helped him hold on when even letters couldn't. In war, survival is not only measured in rations or bullets, but in rituals, small, repetitive acts that give the illusion of control, the rhythm of meaning, the breath between chaos. Elias had no grand beliefs, no sweeping ideologies, but he had rituals, quiet ones, often unnoticed, sometimes absurd, always essential. I am stitched together by habits, he once wrote, not hope. Every evening after the wounded had been seen, after the whispers of the dying had faded into the quiet hum of the camp, Elias would take whatever fresh gauze he had and begin folding it, perfect squares, over and over. He never used the pre-folded packs from supply. To fold the gauze himself was his way of asserting something gentle into a day that had been merciless. Each crease felt like a boundary drawn, a decision made in a world full of random endings. It's the one thing I do where no one bleeds, he wrote. Elias carried 5 smooth pebbles in a cloth pouch tucked inside his coat. He'd picked them up on the first march from a creek in Tuscany, different shapes. One of them was chipped on the edge, and he ran his thumb along that flaw whenever he was afraid. He didn't count them for faith. He counted them for rhythm, before sleep, during long walks between tents, while waiting for the next casualty. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back again. It wasn't about what the stones meant. It was about not forgetting to feel something that wasn't pain. Long after a shift, when the blood had already dried, Elias would wash his instruments again. Not because they were dirty, they weren't, but because the act was simple, predictable. Water, soap, cloth, shine. The motion gave his hands something to do, something that didn't involve holding someone's rib cage together or digging into a wound for shrapnel. Some men sharpen their knives when they're nervous, Elias wrote. I polish tweezers. There is a page in Elias' notebook where one line is written 6 times in different handwriting. I am still here. Sometimes shakier, sometimes lighter. Once in smudged pencil, once carved with a scalpel tip. He never explained it, but it was likely the only affirmation he could give himself. In a world where names were crossed out daily, writing his own over and over might have been the only way to keep it from disappearing. He rationed food like any soldier. But once, after Marco's death, Elias began leaving a small piece of his bread uneaten each night. Just a corner, placed on a flat rock outside the aid tent. They say spirits come if they're fed, he wrote once. I don't know if it's true, but it feels less lonely when I pretend someone's visiting. No one ever touched the bread. The birds left it. The wind ignored it. But he did it anyway. At night, when the stars blinked through the gaps in the tent's canvas, Elias would close his eyes and speak to no one. Out loud, sometimes, he would imagine Marco beside him, or his sister, or the version of himself that didn't join the war. He'd ask questions like, do you think I'm doing enough? What would I be if I wasn't this? If I make it out, do I tell the truth or just say it wasn't so bad? He never waited for answers. Just hearing the questions made things feel real. And in our next segment, we will return to the battlefield, not through Elias's hands, but through his memories of the dying, the stories they whispered in his final moments, the confessions, the fragments of lives Elias could never forget. There is a quiet that descends when death approaches, not always peaceful, but inevitable. It settles over the wounded like fog, thick, muffling, patient. Elias came to recognize it, not by signs in the body, but in the voice, the way it slowed, the way it reached for things beyond the tent, beyond the pain, beyond the war. He never interrupted these final words. He simply listened. Some men shouted for their mothers, he wrote, but more often they whispered, as if confessing to the night. Private Harrington, 18, a farm boy from Yorkshire. Shrapnel through the lung. He grabbed Elias's sleeve, blood soaking through both their uniforms. Don't let me be alone, Doc. Just don't leave me, all right? Elias stayed until the boy's fingers loosened. He never asked his first name, but for weeks afterward Elias would hum the same song Harrington had tried to sing in his last breath. It had no melody by the end, just a rhythm, like rocking a child that would never sleep again. Corporal Vance, 24, bullet to the abdomen. In the haze of morphine, he smiled suddenly and said, "Tell her I got the letter, the one with the flower. I can still smell it, Doc." There was no letter in his pocket. But Elias nodded anyway. He repeated the lie as a kindness. "You know you got it." Maybe that's all dying is, Elias later wrote. A last sentence that someone needs to finish for you. Some asked big questions, ones Elias couldn't answer. One soldier, name unknown, simply stared at the sky and whispered, "What did it all mean? What were we even doing here?" Elias opened his mouth, then closed it. Instead, he gave the man a sip of water, let his hand rest on his shoulder, and stayed until the breath stopped. He didn't want an answer, Elias wrote. He wanted someone to hear the question. Private DeWitt, shot in the leg, infection spreading fast. In his final hours, he kept looking past Elias, not at anything, just through. "It's raining, Mama," he said again and again, though the night was dry. Elias later learned DeWitt had grown up in Louisiana, where rain meant being called inside for soup and warm bread. That phrase, "It's raining, Mama," echoed in Elias's mind for days. Sometimes still, when storms rolled in, he found himself whispering it. "Grief doesn't always shout," he wrote. "Sometimes it drizzles." He never spoke when the dying talked. That was his vow. He believed there was something sacred about a man's final words, even when they made no sense, even when they were nonsense, even when they were just a name or a color or the sound of laughter remembered. "They weren't talking to me," he wrote. "They were talking to whoever they needed to find on the other side." Elias kept a separate section in his journal for these last sentences. No names, just quotes, fragments, echoes, a chorus of endings written in pencil so they would fade, but never vanish entirely. There is a weight to witnessing so many final breaths, not because of the death itself, but because of the living left in the words. Elias carried them all, not out of choice, but because no one else would. As you breathe now, slowly, gently, picture Elias once more, kneeling by a cot, holding a stranger's hand, nodding at words meant for someone else, not answering, just listening. In the next segment, we'll explore the rare, quiet moments when Elias felt truly alone, when no one came for hours, and the silence became something else entirely. There were days when the wounded didn't arrive, when the distant shelling quieted, when no boots thudded across the frost-bitten earth, no stretchers, no shouts, no cries of medic slicing through the air. Elias used to welcome those days, but eventually he feared them more than the noise. "There's a violence in silence," he wrote once, "especially when you know it won't last." On one such day, the 17th of March, Elias marked every passing hour with a pencil line on the inside flap of his tent. By dusk, there were 11 quiet lines. 11 hours without a single knock at the canvas, without blood on the floor, without death. You'd think it would be a relief. Instead, it was disorienting. The silence rang in his ears. He polished the tools again, counted the stones again, folded gauze into even smaller squares. He even reread the journal entry from Marco's last day, slowly, like each word might mean something different this time. "I used to pray for days like this," he wrote. "Now they feel like forgetting." That evening, Elias tried to light a fire, not for heat, but to give his hands a reason to move. But the wood was damp, and the wind refused to cooperate. The sparks hissed and died, again and again. After the third failed attempt, Elias just sat beside the kindling, watching the smoke spiral upward from the half-burnt match. "It's strange," he wrote, "how many hours I have spent trying to coax warmth from things not meant to burn." That night, Elias opened his journal and stared at a blank page. He didn't write, he just looked. Sometimes that was enough. To not fill the page was its own kind of honesty, a confession without words. He later scribbled in the margin, "If I disappear, let this page be what they find." It's everything I couldn't say. Without gunfire, without moaning, without whispered goodbyes, the world around him grew sharper in other ways. He could hear the tent canvas flutter, the creak of the cot, the crack of ice forming in the bucket beside the flap, his own breath louder than it had any right to be. Stillness is not peace, he reflected. It's the sound of memory walking across your thoughts with heavy boots. There's a myth that war is always chaos, fire and fury and thunder. But sometimes the most unbearable moments are the ones when nothing happens, when the cot stays empty, when the bandages go unused, when the door doesn't open, when no one comes. And in that space the mind fills in the silence, with ghosts, with questions, with names that haven't been spoken in weeks. As you sink further into stillness, let the hush of Elias's tent wrap around you. Let your breath slow like pencil lines marked quietly on the canvas of a day no one remembers. In the next segment, we will revisit Elias' inner world once more, as he begins to question whether his memories are truly his, or if they now belong to the war. War has a way of seeping into the mind, not just as experience, but as something that reshapes the very fabric of memory. For Elias, the lines between his own recollections and the echoes of others began to fade, like watercolors bleeding together on a rain-soaked page. "Sometimes I wonder if these memories are mine," he wrote, "or if they belong to every soldier who ever stood where I did." War has a way of seeping into the mind, not just as experience, but as something that reshapes the very fabric of memory. For Elias, the lines between his own recollections and the echoes of others began to fade, like watercolors bleeding together on a rain-soaked page. "Sometimes I wonder if these memories are mine," he wrote, "or if they belong to every soldier who ever stood where I did." One evening, Elias caught his reflection in a cracked mirror hanging in the tent. The face staring back was tired, eyes rimmed with a sadness deeper than any wound. He touched the glass lightly, as if trying to find the edges of himself. Who am I when the world forgets to stop burning? Am I the man who saves, or the one who watches? Or merely the sum of all the ghosts I carry? The weight of memory, Elias realized, was not his alone. He carried the stories of the dying, the fear of the lost, the hope of the broken. Every whispered confession, every final breath, layered over his own identity like sediment. In the quiet moments I feel less like a man and more like a ledger of all that cannot be spoken. Days, nights, weeks' time lost its meaning in the trenches. Elias often confused dreams for memories, and memories for dreams. He wrote of sunsets that might have been imagined, of laughter that echoed from distant corners of his mind, and of silences so profound they seemed to swallow sound itself. "When does memory end and madness begin?" he asked the empty tent. Despite the blurring, the journal remained Elias's tether. Each entry was a claim, a statement of existence. "I write because if I do not, I might dissolve completely," he confessed. His journal was both a refuge and a battleground, a place where he struggled to separate his story from the war's as endless chorus. As you drift deeper now, consider the fragile nature of memory, how it holds us together and sometimes threatens to unravel who we are. Elias's journey reminds us that in war, identity can become a fluid thing, shaped by loss, shared pain, and the stories we inherit. Let the quiet swirl of his thoughts settle around you like a gentle fog, easing the edges of your awareness as night falls softly. In the next segment, we will explore the rare moments of connection Elias found amid the desolation, the small acts of kindness and camaraderie that briefly lit the darkness. In a world swallowed by shadows and sorrow, moments of light shone like fragile stars, brief, tender, yet fiercely persistent. For Elias, amid the relentless noise of gunfire, the ceaseless ache of loss, and the heavy cloak of grief, human connection became the rarest, most precious gift. "When everything falls apart," he wrote, "it is the touch of another soul that reminds us we still exist." On nights when the moon cast pale silver across the muddy trenches, the soldiers would gather quietly, careful not to draw attention. Elias remembered the feel of a rough hand slipping him a cigarette, not for the smoke, but for the gesture. The flicker of a match, the first deep breath, then the slow exhale, releasing the tension in their bodies like a whispered secret. They spoke softly then, stories from home, jokes only half remembered, plans for a future that seemed both distant and impossible. The smoke was a shield, Elias wrote, a thin veil between the horrors we faced and the lives we dreamed of. Food was scarce and simple, sometimes a tin of stewed beef or hard biscuits that crumbled between fingers. But when a cook managed to bake a fresh loaf or stew a pot of vegetables, the small mess hall would fill with laughter and grateful sighs. Elias recalled the way the smell of warm bread pulled the men from their exhaustion, if only for a moment. In that aroma, he noted, there was a brief escape, a taste of normalcy, a breath away from war. He treasured those times, watching faces soften, eyes brighten, and shoulders relax just enough to forget the coming dawn. In the sterile glow of the aid tent, beyond the urgency and blood, Elias witnessed acts of gentleness that defied the chaos. He saw nurses brushing a patient's hair back with trembling fingers. He saw comrades holding hands as they whispered encouragement. He saw himself, too, leaning close to soothe a frightened boy with words softer than any medicine. Even in hell, Elias wrote, there were pockets of mercy, small, fleeting, but real. Music rarely found its way to the front lines, but sometimes a soldier hummed an old tune while waiting, a soft rhythm that steadied shaking hands. Elias found solace in these melodies, fragments of home carried on ragged breaths. He remembered one night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, when the camp erupted in a quiet chorus of a song from their youth. It was a fragile thread weaving us together, he reflected, a reminder that beyond this war there was still beauty. In a place where death was constant and proximity unavoidable, the simple act of a reassuring touch held extraordinary power. Elias noted how a hand on a shoulder, a clasped wrist, a gentle squeeze could speak volumes where words failed. No words could heal the wounds we carried, but a touch could remind us we were not alone. As you settle deeper into rest, imagine these moments of light, the shared cigarettes, the warm meals, the quiet songs, the hands held firmly in the dark. They are small, but they endure. Like faint stars in the night sky, they offer hope, connection, and the soft assurance that even in the darkest times, the human spirit reaches out, seeking, remembering, and holding on. In the next segment, we will delve into Elias's most private reflections, the moments when hope flickered most faintly and the weight of war pressed hardest. In the relentless gray of war, hope was a fragile ember flickering in the wind, sometimes bright enough to warm, sometimes so faint it threatened to be snuffed out entirely. Elias carried that ember close, but often felt the weight of doubt pressing down, threatening to smother it. Hope is a quiet thing, he wrote, not a roar, but a whisper in the darkest hour. There were mornings when Elias awoke early enough to watch the sun stretch its pale fingers across the sky. The first light spilled softly over scarred fields and shattered trees. In those moments he felt a glimmer of something beyond exhaustion and loss. The world keeps turning, he noted, and the sun will rise again, even if I don't. Yet even as the light touched his face, he knew the day would bring fresh trials, new wounds, and more farewells. Rain often fell cold and steady, drumming on the canvas and chilling bones. Elias listened to those rains like a dirge, feeling the shadows lengthen in his mind. He questioned the meaning of it all. The sacrifices, the deaths, the endless grinding toll. Is this the price of peace or the cost of madness? He asked the storm. In his pocket, Elias kept a folded letter from home, faded and creased. He read it often, tracing the words with trembling fingers. The letter was a tether to a life that seemed to belong to someone else now. Each word was a thread pulling me back, but some days I feared it might snap. At night, under the fragile safety of darkness, Elias wrestled with the ghosts within. Some nights he imagined the war ending, the guns silenced, the men returning home. Other nights those dreams twisted into shadows, visions of endless battlefields and silent graves. Sleep was sometimes the only battle I lost willingly, he confessed. Elias wondered what, if anything, would remain of him when the war ended. Would his name be remembered? Would his story be told? Or would he dissolve into the countless others lost in the tides of history? To be forgotten is the quietest death, he wrote. As you rest now, feel the fragile dance between light and shadow within Elias's heart. Let the flickers of hope soothe you. Let the shadows soften, knowing they are part of the human story, a story of resilience, struggle, and the quiet courage to continue. When you're ready, we can move to the next segment, where Elias's journey nears its close, and the final pages of his journal await. As the seasons turned and the war ground on, Elias's journal transformed from a place of detailed observation to a sanctuary of quiet contemplation. The pages, once filled with dense accounts of the living and the dying, grew more sparse. Yet each word gained weight, a soft murmur from a weary soul preparing to say goodbye. The end is near, though I do not know when, he wrote, but I prepare as one does for a storm, steadily, quietly, and without complaint. In these last entries, Elias's attention settled on the subtle and often overlooked moments. The chill of dawn creeping through the tense canvas, the sharp tang of cold air that made his breath a visible ghost, the faint creak of the wooden stretcher beneath him. These were the quiet companions of a man standing on the edge, each detail a reminder of being alive, even as he approached the unknown. He described the taste of stale bread that seemed harder than ever to swallow, and the occasional warmth of thin soup, barely enough to thaw the chill inside his bones. To notice is to survive, he whispered in his journal. Even when the body fails, the mind clings to these threads of existence. Among his final writings were letters addressed to those he loved but never sent. A letter to his sister spoke of longing and regret. I carry you in my thoughts every dawn, wishing I could share the quiet moments away from this madness. Another, to Marco, his fallen friend, was filled with the pain of absence and the hope for reunion beyond this life. You're with me still, in every breath and in every shadow. These letters remained folded in the pages of his journal, fragile promises never delivered, yet offering Elias a kind of solace, a way to speak when spoken words could no longer reach. Elias did not offer grand declarations of faith or victory. Instead, he wrote with a quiet acceptance, a surrender to the things he could not control. He acknowledged the uncertainty ahead, the fear lurking at the edges of his thoughts, and the small courage it took simply to face another day. I do not know what awaits me, he admitted, but I will meet it with what remains of my strength and my will to remember. The last lines of his journal were almost a prayer, a wish for those who might one day read his words. May these words be a bridge from the silence of the fallen to those who listen. May they carry the weight of memory gently and with care. There was no fear in that hope, only a deep, abiding wish that the stories of those lost might live on, softly and respectfully, in the hearts of others. Elias's pen finally rested. The journal closed. Outside, the wind whispered through the broken trees. The world moved on as it always does. But in those pages lay a quiet testimony, not of glory or triumph, but of witness, endurance, and the tender humanity that war could never steal. As you ease further into calm, allow yourself to feel the gentle closing of a story long told in silence. Elias's journey reminds us that even at the end, when words grow faint and strength fades, there is dignity, there is hope, and there is the power of memory carried forward. Let the softness of this moment wrap around you like a comforting shawl. Even after the guns fall silent and the soldiers return to distant homes, the echoes of their lives persist, carried not in monuments or medals alone, but in the quiet memories they leave behind. Elias's journal, like many others, becomes a whisper across time, a soft voice amid the stillness, reminding us that every fallen soldier was once a world of hopes, fears, and dreams. Decades will pass, seasons will turn, and the trenches will slowly fade beneath grass and earth. But the pages of a journal do not simply disappear. They lie in dusty archives waiting for patient hands to unfold their stories. Time may dull the sharpness of pain. Elias might have written, but it cannot erase the quiet courage of those who endured. Remembering the fallen is a tender act, one that requires softness and care. It is not about grand narratives or loud celebrations, but about holding space for lives lived and lost, for stories whispered in the dark, for pain borne in silence. Memory is a fragile flame, Elias's words suggest, one we must protect from the winds of forgetting. Those who survive carry the burden and the blessing of memory. They walk the earth carrying invisible scars and invisible stories. And those who read, listen, or simply pause, they become keepers of that flame, guardians of the quiet legacy left by Elias and countless others. As you lie in the quiet darkness, let the echoes of Elias's life settle gently around you. Feel the weight of history softened by reflection. Let yourself be cradled by the stories of the fallen, carried across time, carried in heartbeats, carried in the breath between night and dawn. With this, our journey through Elias's journal draws gently to a close. May his story, and the stories of all those who walked through warp's shadow, bring a calm understanding, a quiet honoring of life, loss, and enduring hope. As our journey through Elias's journal comes to a close, we pause to breathe in the stillness that follows long after the echoes of war have faded. Imagine the quiet fields where soldiers once stood, now blanketed by gentle grass and wildflowers, where the earth holds their stories softly beneath the surface. Here, in the hush between the past and present, Elias's words seem to whisper, we find the peace they fought to reach. Take a moment now to honor the lives chronicled, not as distant history, but as threads woven into the fabric of our shared humanity. Feel the weight of their courage, the tenderness of their memories, and the quiet strength that remains in the telling. In this stillness we remember not only the pain of war, but the resilience that shines through even the darkest nights. Hawk Elias's world was filled with hardship and loss. We carry his legacy forward, a soft lantern guiding us toward compassion, understanding, and peace. May his voice and the voices of all who bore witness linger with you gently as you drift into rest. Let the calm wash over you now, like a slow, steady river flowing toward sleep. Breathe deeply, feel your body relax, and know that in this quiet moment you are wrapped in the embrace of memory, history, and peace. Thank you for joining this chapter of Journal of the Fallen. May your night be calm, your dreams gentle, and your rest deep. Good night.